Hi everyone, thank you for having me. Before I start, I do just want to acknowledge that the topics I'm going to be talking to tonight are going to touch on sexual harassment and assault. So if you do find any of those topics potentially triggering, it is completely okay to take a breath or take a break outside now or at any point during. So to start off with, I just want to take you back to my high school. To give you a bit of a sense of who I was in high school, I was honestly more of the bookish kind of person. I leaned heavily on my comfort TV shows, and for me, this was Grey's Anatomy, of course, and also Suits. I was also that person that really liked matcha, and unfortunately, it was before it was cool to drink it. Now, what about my sex education? So I also got to experience the rite of passage that I think every young person in Australia has, putting the condom on the banana. But in my school, we also got this video, which was two cartoon adults who then got into bed, under the bed sheets, and then suddenly they turned into these two cats, and the cats kind of swirled around each other, and I think that was meant to represent sex. So yes, it was honestly a little bit of a weird video, and unfortunately for me, it was really unforgettable. Now, what about my consent education? I remember very vividly the one and only discussion that we ever got about consent. And I remember us trudging into the lecture hall, a little bit like this one, and the presenter says to us, "So this is what you do if you're about to be sexually assaulted." And I went to an all-girls school, so we sit up a little bit straighter in our chairs. And the presenter says, "If this is about to happen, then you say yes. And this gives you an opportunity to get away." Now, I'm honestly quite mind blown by this advice. At that time, when I was 16, I thought it was really amazing advice. I was thinking, wow, this is so realistic. It seems like a survival strategy. And this person must be super clued in. And then after the talk, I didn't really think a lot more of it. So fast forward a little bit, and I'm now about to attend O Week. I'm really lucky because I am able to stay on residential campus, and O Week is super exciting. It's, some parties, meeting new people, new experiences. And at the beginning of every O Week is the obligatory safety talks. And so I find myself again trudging into a different lecture hall. And I realize that it's actually the same presenter. They give the same talk and give the same advice. What's different this time is my response to it. Because this time, the advice to say yes so that you can get away, I feel like someone has just poured a bucket of ice cold water on me. That advice is not hitting me the exact same way as it did when I was 16. This time, I'm thinking, wow, is that really the best that we have when it comes to education to prevent sexual violence? Now, these sorts of talks and this kind of approach doesn't happen in a vacuum. It actually just reflects the broader society and the attitudes that we have and how normalized sexual harassment and assault is. So it's that feeling of discomfort when you know that something has gone wrong, but you don't have the words to actually articulate how you feel. And we know from the stats in Australia that 1 in 5 women and 1 in 20 men have experienced sexual violence. And then when you take into account the fact that out of those people, a staggeringly small amount will actually report this to the police. And then beyond that, less than 10% of those cases will actually go to a guilty verdict in court. And we're teaching people that the onus of managing all of this to young people, that's on them. So I want to take a pause at this point, and I just want to ask you to close your eyes and to think to yourself, if you or someone that you know has ever experienced any of the following. Have you ever experienced any kind of intrusive questioning that made you feel really uncomfortable? Have you experienced unwanted touching or kissing? Have you ever heard in response to someone talking about sexual harassment or assault, but what were they wearing? And finally, have you ever thought either about your own experience or someone else's, that voice coming through and saying, but am I overreacting? Is this actually not a big deal? And am I being too sensitive? If you answered yes to any single one of these questions, then that is just an example of the culture of normalized sexual harassment and assault. And this is what was really insidious in the experiences of myself, my friends, and young people all across Australia. I remember vividly going to visit my best friend Angie. We were sitting on her floor in her uni dorm and sharing these stories and just trying to unpack what was happening to ourselves and our friends. And it took a really long time, but we finally got to realize that actually these experiences were examples of sexual harassment and assault, and it was not okay. And when we finally realized this, we were really angry. Because what do you mean we've never been taught what the definitions of sexual harassment and assault are? What do you mean that we've been taught, but we haven't been taught about consent? And what do you mean we've been taught how to survive without all of that information? So we channeled that anger and we started Consent Labs because we believed that if knowledge is power, then everybody should have access to that, and ideally before anything were to happen. So today, I'm really proud to say that Consent Labs is far beyond anything that Angie and I could have ever imagined when we started it in 2016 and when we were 19. Today, we have educated over 100,000 people across Australia in every single state and territory. We have done some really amazing advocacy, including presenting to the Senate on why we think consent laws should be harmonised across Australia. And we've also had some really cool collaborations, and my favourite is the one where we convinced Messina to make a cone scent flavour to celebrate International Day of Consent. But the overall journey to getting there, it was honestly really hard. The first challenge that we faced was credibility. When you're young, that often is equated to not being taken very seriously. And so, apart from my passion in Consent Labs, I'm also a medical doctor. And so I armed us with the biggest buzzwords that I knew from medicine, and that is evidence-based and multidisciplinary. So they're buzzwords, yes, but I think they're pretty good ones, especially because sexual consent is a little unique in that it spans so many different sectors. Just to name a couple, it spans education, healthcare, legal, law enforcement. But the status quo that we were receiving was either nothing at all or just hearing from one single voice or one single perspective. The second challenge that we had was denial. School after school that we spoke to told us that the sex ed curriculum did not need to be fixed. And as I've just shared, personally I feel that putting a condom on a banana and having a weird swirly cat video doesn't really seem to cut it for me. The third challenge that we had was the taboo around the topic. When we finally launched our program in 2019, after 3 years of really extensive research, focus grouping, asking all the experts to review it, no school would still touch us with a 10-foot pole. I remember speaking to this amazing PE teacher, her name was Vanessa, and she was awesome because she was one of our earliest advocates. And she says to us, "It would be great to have you in because what I'm hearing from my students is that they come to me they're really confused, they're experiencing things that clearly demonstrate that gap in their education. And Angie and I are really excited because this would have been our first ever school. And so we pitch, we prepare for the pitch obsessively, we practice, and finally the PE department gives us the green light. So we're like, yes, that's amazing. At this point, it's really just the two of us, and so Angie takes a day off of her finance job. I'm trying to sneakily shuffle around my med school timetable. But the day before, the principal pulls out. They say that it's too controversial and it's too risky. They're too worried about what the parent cohort is going to think. And that is really, really devastating because we'd been hearing from so many teachers like her about the experiences of students. And so at that point, Angie and I are thinking, okay, is it honestly worth even continuing to try and do this? It feels like such an uphill battle. But I'm really glad that we did because in 2021, some amazing young women brought consent into the national conversation: Chanel Contos, Brittany Higgins, and Grace Tame. And suddenly, all the schools that had said no to us because they were too scared or they didn't think that it was necessary, they were calling us back. But I'm also really privileged because Consent Labs has taught me so much about what advocacy means to me. And it's also taught me that you don't necessarily have to stand out in order to stand up or to speak out. I think when we think about advocacy, especially what it looks like online, we often think it has to look really loud, that it involves making a lot of noise. It's a lot of speeches or campaigns or other stuff like that. And that didn't really sit as comfortably for me personally. I grew up as a second-generation Chinese Australian, and so for me, I'd always been raised to basically keep my head down, to work really hard, not to rock the boat, and to just trust the fact that merit was going to get me where I needed to go. But what Consent Labs has actually taught me on that journey is that speaking up is not only important, but actually essential as well. But there's no one-size-fits-all for advocacy. It's about choosing the right lever, the right audience, the right time, but most importantly, doing it in a way that feels really authentic to you. What I was able to realize through this whole journey was that for me, advocacy looks like leaning on expertise and using collaboration as those tools. As someone who doesn't feel as comfortable sharing their own personal experiences all the time, something I did feel super comfortable doing was getting all of the experts into the room, making sure that our work was grounded in as much data as possible, so that I could say with my full chest that yes, this work is really important, and that young people are not only demanding to have this consent education, but they also really deserve it. And so my invitation to you is to think about what advocacy actually means for you. Advocacy can be big or small. It could look like, calling someone out when you see them doing behaviour that you don't agree with. It could look like supporting a friend. It could also look like not laughing if a joke punches down, or just showing up if, there's a cause that you really believe in. It doesn't always have to be something that is loud, and you don't have to be the loudest person if you don't feel comfortable. But make sure that it's a voice that is true to you. And if we're all able to do that, then we can all contribute to making more meaningful change. Thank you.